Morning and welcome. Let me just turn my volume up a bit so you can hear me. Welcome to the final reading from the book If Only They Could Talk by James Herriot. Chapter, normally it would be 2 chapters, but there's 31 chapters in the book. There's an afterword which I'm not going to read. And there is 31 chapters, as I've said, so I shall read that 31st chapter along with chapter 29 and 30, and then the next book we'll be reading from in the James Herriot series is the one I've already read, If Only They Could... It Shouldn't Happen to a Vet, but I've not read it on YouTube, so it will be interesting to see how it comes along. So, chapter 29. It didn't take Mr. Cranford long to make good his threat. He called at the surgery shortly after lunch the following day, and Siegfried and I, enjoying a postprandial cigarette in the sitting room, heard the jangle of the doorbell. We didn't get up because most of the farmers walked in after ringing. The dogs, however, went into their usual routine. They had had a long run on the high moor that morning and had just finished licking out their dinner bowls. Tired and distended, they had collapsed in a snoring heap around Siegfried's feet. There was nothing they wanted more than 10 minutes' peace, but, dedicated as they were to their self-appointed role of fierce guardians of the house, they did not hesitate. They leaped, baying from the rug, and hurled themselves into the passage. People often wondered why Siegfried kept 5 dogs. Not only kept them, but took them everywhere with him. Driving on his rounds, it was difficult to see him at all among the shaggy heads and waving tails, and anybody approaching the car would recoil in terror from the savage barking and the bared fangs and glaring eyes framed in the windows. "I cannot for the life of me understand," Siegfried would declare, thumping his fist on his knee, "why people keep dogs as pets. A dog should have a useful function. Let it be used for farm work, for shooting, for guiding. But why anybody should keep the things just hanging around the place beats me." It was a pronouncement he was continually making, often through a screen of flapping ears and lolling tongues as he sat in his car. His listener would look wonderingly from the huge greyhound to the tiny terrier, from the spaniel to the whippet to the Scottie. But nobody ever asked Siegfried why he kept his dogs, his own dogs. I judged that the pack fell upon Mr. Cranford about the bend of the passage, and many a lesser man would have fled, but I could hear him fighting his way doggedly forward. When he came through the sitting-room door, he had removed his hat and was beating the dogs off with it. It wasn't a wise move, and the barking rose to a higher pitch. The man's eyes stared and his lips moved continuously, but nothing came through. Siegfried, courteous as ever, rose and indicated a chair. His lips, too, were moving, no doubt in a few gracious words of welcome. Mr. Cranford flapped his black coat, swooped across the carpet, and perched. The dogs sat in a ring round him and yelled up into his face. Usually they collapsed after their exhausting performance, but there was something in the look or smell of Mr. Cranford that they didn't like. Siegfried leaned back in his armchair, put his fingers together and assumed a judicial expression. Now and again he nodded, understandingly, or narrowed his eyes as if taking an interesting point. Practically nothing could be heard from Mr. Cranford, but occasionally a word or phrase penetrated. "Have a serious complaint to make. Doesn't know his job. Can't afford. Not a rich man. These dang dogs. Won't have him again. Down dog. Get by. Nout but robbery. Siegfried, completely relaxed and apparently oblivious of the din, listened attentively, but as the minutes passed I could see the strain beginning to tell on Mr. Cranford. His eyes began to start from their sockets, and the veins corded on his scrawny neck as he tried to get his message across. Finally it was too much for him. He jumped up and a leaping brown tide bore him to the door. He gave a last defiant cry, lashed out again with his hat, and was gone. Pushing open the dispensary door a few weeks later, I found my boss mixing an ointment. He was working with great care, turning and returning the glutinous mass on a marble slab. "What's this you're doing?" I asked. Siegfried threw down his spatula and straightened his back. "Ointment for a boar." He looked past me at Tristan, who had just come in. "And I don't know why the hell I'm doing it when some people are sitting around on their backsides." He indicated the spatula. "Right, Tristan, you can have a go. When you've finished your cigarette, that is." His expression softened as Tristan hastily nipped out his woodbine and began to work away on the slab. "Pretty stiff concoction, that. Takes a bit of mixing," Siegfried said with satisfaction, looking at his brother's bent head. "The back of my neck was beginning to ache with it." He turned to me. "By the way, you'll be interested to hear it's for your old friend Cranford. For that prize boar of his. It's got a nasty sore across its back and he's worried to death about it. Wins him a lot of money at the shows, and a blemish there would be disastrous." "Cranford's still with us, then?" "Yes, it's a funny thing, but we can't get rid of him. I don't like losing clients, but I'd gladly make an exception of this chap. He won't have you near the place after that lightning job, and he makes it very clear he doesn't think much of me either. Tells me I never do his beasts any good. Says it would have been a lot better if he'd never called me. And moans like hell when he gets his bill. He's more bother than he's worth. And on top of everything, he gives me the creeps. But he won't leave. He damn well won't leave." "He knows which side his bread's buttered," I said. "He gets first-rate service, and the moaning is part of the system to keep the bills down." "Maybe you're right, but I wish there was a simple way to get rid of him." He tapped Tristan on the shoulder. "All right, don't strain yourself. That'll do. Put it into this ointment box and label it, 'Apply liberally to the boar's back 3 times daily, working it well in with the fingers.' And post it to Mr. Cranford. And while you're on, will you post this faeces sample to the laboratory at Leeds to test for Jonas disease?" He held out a treacle tin brimming with foul-smelling liquid diarrhoea. It was a common thing to collect such samples and send them away for Jonas tests, worm counts, etc. And there was always one thing all the samples had in common. They were very large. All that was needed for the tests was a couple of teaspoonfuls, but the farmers were lavish in their quantities. They seemed pleasantly surprised that all the vet wanted was a bit of muck from the dung channel. They threw aside their natural caution and shovelled the stuff up cheerfully into the biggest container they could find. They brushed aside all protests. "Take plenty, we've lots of it," was their attitude. Tristan took hold of the tin gingerly and began to look along the shelves. "We don't seem to have any of those little glass sample jars." "That's right, we're out of them," said Siegfried. "I meant to order some more, but never mind. Shove the lid on that tin and press it down tight, then parcel it up well in brown paper. It'll travel to the lab all right." It took only 3 days for Mr. Cranford's name to come up again. Siegfried was opening the morning mail, throwing the circulars to one side and making a pile of the bills and receipts when he became suddenly very still. He had frozen over a letter on blue notepaper, and he sat like a statue till he read it through. At length he raised his head. His face was expressionless. "James, this is just about the most vitriolic letter I have ever read. It's from Cranford. He's finished with us for good, and is considering taking legal action against us." "What have we done this time?" I asked. "He accuses us of grossly insulting him and endangering the health of his boar. He says we sent him a treacle tin full of cow dung, the word is the S word, with instructions to rub it on the boar's back 3 times daily." Tristan, who had been sitting with his eyes half closed, became fully awake. He rose unhurriedly and began to make his way towards the door. His hand was on the knob when his brother's voice thundered out, "Tristan, come back here. Sit down. I think we have something to talk about." Tristan looked up resolutely, waiting for the storm to break, but Siegfried was unexpectedly calm. His voice was gentle. "So you've done it again. When will I ever learn that I can't trust you to carry out the simplest task? It wasn't much to ask, was it? 2 little parcels to post. Hardly a tough assignment. But you managed to botch it. You got the labels wrong, didn't you?" Tristan wriggled in his chair. "I'm sorry, I can't think how." Siegfried held up his hand. "Oh, don't worry. Your usual luck has come to your aid. With anybody else this bloomer would be catastrophic, but with Cranford it's like divine providence." He paused for a moment, and a dreamy expression crept into his eyes. "The label said to work it well in with the fingers, I seem to recall. And Mr. Cranford says he opened the package at the breakfast table. Yes, Tristan, I think you have found the way. This, I do believe, has done it." I said, "But how about the legal action?" "Oh, I think we can forget about that. Mr. Cranford has a great sense of his own dignity. Just think how it would sound in court." He crumpled the letter and dropped it into the waste paper basket. "Well, let's get on with some work." He led the way out and stopped abruptly in the passage. He turned to face us. "There's another thing, of course. I wonder how the lab is making out testing that ointment for Schön's disease." Chapter 30. I was really worried about Tricky this time. I had pulled up my car when I saw him in the street with his mistress, and I was shocked at his appearance. He had become hugely fat, like a bloated sausage with a leg at each corner. His eyes, bloodshot and rheumy, stared straight ahead, and his tongue lolled from his jaws. Mrs. Pumphrey hastened to explain. "He was so listless, Mr. Herriot. He seemed to have no energy. I thought he must be suffering from malnutrition, so I have been giving him some little extras between meals to build him up. Some calf's foot jelly and malt and cod liver oil, and a bowl of Horlicks at night to make him sleep. Nothing much, really." "And did you cut down on the sweet things, as I told you?" "Oh, I did for a bit, but he seemed to be so weak. I had to relent. He does love cream cakes and chocolates so. Wow, I can't bear to refuse him." I looked down again at the little dog. That was the trouble. Tricky's only fault was greed. He had never been known to refuse food. He would tackle a meal at any hour of the day or night. And I wondered about all the things Mrs. Pumphrey hadn't mentioned. The pâté on thin biscuits, the fudge, the rich truffles. Tricky loved them all. "Are you giving him plenty of exercise?" "Well, he has his little walks with me, as you can see, but Hodgkin has been down with lumbago, so there has been no ring throwing lately." I tried to sound severe. "Now, I really mean this. If you don't cut his food right down and give him more exercise, he is going to be really ill. You must harden your heart and keep him on a very strict diet." Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands. "Oh, I will, Mr. Herriot. I'm sure you are right, but it is so difficult, so very difficult." She set off, head down, along the road, as if determined to put the new regime into practice immediately. I watched their progress with growing concern. Tricky was tottering along in his little tweed coat. He had a whole wardrobe of these coats, warm tweed or tartan ones for the cold weather and mackintoshes for the wet days. He struggled on, drooping in his harness. I thought it wouldn't be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. The expected call came within a few days. Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught. Tricky would eat nothing, refused even his favourite dishes, and besides he had bouts of vomiting. He spent all his time lying on a rug, panting. Didn't want to go walks, didn't want to do anything. I had made my plans in advance. The only way was to get Tricky out of the house for a period. I suggested that he be hospitalised for about a fortnight to be kept under observation. The poor lady almost swooned. She had never been separated from her darling before. She was sure he would pine and die if he did not see her every day. But I took a firm line. Tricky was very ill, and this was the only way to save him. In fact, I thought it best to take him without delay, and followed by Mrs. Pumphrey's wailings, I marched out to the car carrying the little dog wrapped in a blanket. The entire staff was roused, and maids rushed in and out, bringing his daybed, his nightbed, favourite cushions, toys and rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl. Realising that my car would never hold all the stuff, I started to drive away. As I moved off, Mrs. Pumphrey, with a despairing cry, threw an armful of the little coats through the window. I looked in the mirror before I turned the corner of the drive. Everybody was in tears. Out on the road, I glanced down at the pathetic little animal, gasping on the seat by my side. I patted the head, and Tricky made a brave effort to wag his tail. "Poor old lad," I said. "You haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you." At the surgery, the household dogs surged round me. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes, and when put down lay motionless on the carpet. The other dogs, after sniffing around him for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. I made up a bed for him in a warm, loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. For 2 days I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. At the end of the 2nd day he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on the 3rd he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in the yard. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe the greyhound and his friends. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved off down the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat, but obviously intrigued. Later that day, I was present at feeding time. I watched while Tristan slopped the food into the bowls. There was the usual headlong rush, followed by the sounds of high-speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. When they had finished, Tricky took a walk round the shining bowls, licking casually inside 1 or 2 of them. Next day, an extra bowl was put out for him, and I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards it. From then on his progress was rapid. He had no medicinal treatment of any kind, but all day he ran about with the dogs, joining in their friendly scrimmages. He discovered the joys of being bowled over, trampled on and squashed every few minutes. He became an accepted member of the gang, an unlikely silky little object among the shaggy crew, fighting like a tiger for his share at mealtimes, and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. He had never had such a time in his life. All the while Mrs. Pumphrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing 12 times a day for the latest bulletins. I dodged the questions about whether his cushions were being turned regularly, or his correct coat worn according to the weather. But I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and convalescing rapidly. The word convalescing seemed to do something to Mrs. Pumphrey. She started to bring round fresh eggs, 2 dozen at a time, to build up Tricky's strength. For a happy period there were 2 eggs each for breakfast, But when the bottles of sherry began to arrive, the real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on the household. It was the same delicious vintage that I knew so well, and it was to enrich Tricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion with 2 glasses before and several during the meal. Siegfried and Tristan took turns at proposing Tricky's health, and the standard of speech-making improved daily. As the sponsor, I was always called upon to reply. We could hardly believe it when the brandy came. 2 bottles of cordon bleu, intended to put a final edge on Tricky's constitution. Siegfried dug out some balloon glasses belonging to his mother. I had never seen them before, but for a few nights they saw constant service as the fine spirit was rolled around, inhaled, and reverently drunk. They were days of deep content, starting well with the extra egg in the morning, bolstered up and sustained by the midday sherry, and finishing luxuriously round the fire with the brandy. It was a temptation to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest, but I knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering, and after a fortnight felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up outside the surgery. The chauffeur opened the door, and I could just make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey almost lost in the interior. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Herriot, do tell me the truth. Is he really better?" "Yes, he's fine. There's no need for you to get out of the car. I'll go and fetch him." I walked through the house into the garden. A mass of dogs was hurtling round and round the lawn, and in their midst, ears flapping, tail waving, was the little golden figure of Tricky. In 2 weeks he had been transformed into a live, hard-muscled animal. He was keeping up well with the pack, stretching out in great bounds, his chest almost brushing the ground. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house. The chauffeur was still holding the car door open, and when Tricky saw his mistress he took off from my arms in a tremendous leap and sailed into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. She gave a startled "oof," and then had to defend herself as he swarmed over her, licking her face and barking. During the excitement I helped the chauffeur to bring out the beds, toys, cushions, coats and bowls, none of which had been used. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey leaned out of the window. Tears shone in her eyes. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Herriot," she cried, "how can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of a surgery." And chapter 31. That last sentence was, "This is a triumph of surgery." So chapter 31, the last chapter. I came suddenly and violently awake, my heart thudding and pounding in time with the insistent summons of the telephone. These bedside phones were undoubtedly an improvement on the old system, when you had to gallop downstairs and stand shivering with your bare feet on the tiles of the passage. But this explosion a few inches from your ear in the small hours, when the body was weak and the resistance low, was shattering. I felt sure it couldn't be good for me. The voice at the other end was offensively cheerful. "I have a mare on falling. She doesn't seem to be getting on with job. Reckon foal must be laid wrong. Can you come and give me a hand?" My stomach contracted to a tight ball. This was just a little bit too much. Once out of bed in the middle of the night was bad enough, but twice was unfair. In fact, it was sheer cruelty. I had had a hard day and had been glad to crawl between the sheets at midnight. I had been hauled out at 1 o'clock to a damned awkward carving and hadn't got back till nearly 3. What was the time now? 3:15. Good God, I had only had a few minutes' sleep. And a foaling. Twice as difficult as a carving as a rule. What a life! What a bloody awful life! I muttered into the receiver, "Right, Mr. Dixon, I'll come straight away," and shuffled across the room, yawning and stretching, feeling the ache in my shoulders and arms. I looked down at the pile of clothing in the chair. I had taken them off, put them on again, taken them off already tonight, and something in me rebelled at the thought of putting them on yet again. With a weary grunt, I took my mackintosh from the back of the door and donned it over my pyjamas, went downstairs to where my Wellingtons stood outside the dispensary door and stuck my feet into them. It was a warm night. What was the point of getting dressed up? I'd only have to strip off again at the farm. I opened the back door and trailed slowly down the long garden, my tired mind only faintly aware of the fragrance that came from the darkness. I reached the yard at the bottom, opened the double doors into the lane and got the car out of the garage. In the silent town, the buildings glowed whitely as the headlights swept across the shuttered shop fronts, the tight-drawn curtains. Everybody was asleep. Everybody except me, James Herriot, creeping sore and exhausted towards another spell of hard labour. Why the hell had I ever decided to become a country vet? I must have been crazy to pick a job where you worked 7 days a week, and through the night as well. Sometimes I felt as though the practice was a malignant living entity, testing me, trying me out, putting the pressure on more and more to see just at what point I would drop down dead. It was a completely unconscious reaction, which hoisted me from my bath of self-pity and left me tripping on the brink, regarding the immediate future with a return of some of my natural optimism. For one thing, Dixon's place was down at the foot of the dale, just off the main road, and they had that unusual luxury, electric light in the buildings. And I couldn't be all that tired, not at the age of 24 with all my faculties unimpaired. I'd take a bit of killing yet. I smiled to myself and relapsed into the state of half-suspended animation, which was normal to me at these times, a sleepy blanketing of all the senses except those required for the job in hand. Many times over the past months, I had got out of bed, driven far into the country, done my job efficiently and returned to bed without ever having been fully awake. I was right about Dixon's. The graceful Clydesdale mare was in a well-lit loose box, and I laid out my ropes and instruments with a feeling of deep thankfulness. As I tipped antiseptic into the steaming bucket, I watched the mare straining and paddling her limbs. The effort produced nothing. There were no feet protruding from the vulva. There was almost certainly a malrepresentation. Still thinking hard, I removed my mackintosh and was jerked out of my reverie by a shout of laughter from the farmer. "God help us, what's this? The folderols!" I looked down at my pyjamas, which were pale blue with an arresting broad red stripe. "This, Mr. Dixon," I replied with dignity, "is my night attire. I didn't bother to dress." "Oh, I see now." The farmer's eyes glinted impishly. "I'm sorry, but I thought I'd got the wrong chap for a second. I saw a fella just like you at Blackpool last year. Same suit exactly, but he had a stripy top hat too, and a stick. Did a champion little dance." "Can't oblige you, I'm afraid," I said with a wan smile. "I'm just not in the mood right now." I stripped off, noting with interest the deep red grooves caused by the calf's teeth a couple of hours ago. Those teeth had been like razors, peeling off neat little rolls of skin every time I pushed my arm past them. The mare trembled as I felt my way inside her. Nothing, then just a tail and the pelvic bones, and the body and hind legs disappearing away beyond my reach. Breech presentation. Easy in the cow for a man who knew his job, but tricky in the mare because of the tremendous length of the foal's legs. It took me a sweating, panting half-hour with ropes and a blunt hook on the end of a flexible cane to bring the first leg round. The second leg came more easily, and the mare seemed to know there was no obstruction now. She gave a great heave, and the foal shot out onto the straw with myself, arms around its body, sprawling on top of it. To my delight, I felt the small form jerking convulsively. I had felt no movement while I was working, and had decided that it was dead, but the foal was very much alive, shaking its head and snorting out the placental fluid it had inhaled during its delayed entry. When I had finished towelling myself, I turned to see the farmer, with an abnormally straight face, holding out my colourful jacket like a valet. "Allow me, sir," he said gravely. Okay, I laughed. "I'll get properly dressed next time." As I was putting my things in the car boot, the farmer carelessly threw a parcel onto the back seat. "Bit of butter for you," he muttered. When I started the engine, he bent level with the window. "I think about that mare, and I've been badly wanting a foal out of her. Thank ye, lad, thank ye very much." He waved as I moved away, and I heard his parting cry, "You did all right for a Kentucky minstrel." I leaned back in my seat and peered through heavy lids at the empty road unwinding in the pale morning light. The sun had come up, a dark crimson ball hanging low over the misted fields. I felt utterly content, warm with the memory of the foal trying to struggle on to its knees, its absurdly long legs still out of control. Grand that the little beggar had been alive after all. There was something desolate about delivering a lifeless creature. The Dixon farm was in the low country where the dale widened out and gave on to the great plain of York. I had to cross a loop of the busy road which connected the West Riding with the industrial north-east. A thin tendril of smoke rose from the chimney of the all-night transport cafe which stood there, and as I slowed down to take the corner, a faint but piercing smell of cooking found its way into the car. The merest breath, but rich in the imagery of fried sausages and beans and tomatoes and chips. God, I was starving. I looked at my watch. 5:15. I wouldn't be eating for a long time yet. I turned in among the lorries on the broad strip of tarmac. Hastening towards the still-lighted building, I decided that I wouldn't be greedy. Nothing spectacular, just a nice sandwich. I had been here a few times before, and the sandwiches were very good, and I deserved some nourishment after my hard night. I stepped into the warm interior where groups of lorry drivers sat behind mounded plates, but as I crossed the floor the busy clatter died and was replaced by a tense silence. A fat man in a leather jacket sat transfixed, a loaded fork halfway to his mouth, while his neighbour, gripping a huge mug of tea in an oily hand, stared with bulging eyes at my ensemble. It occurred to me then that bright red striped pyjamas and Wellingtons might seem a little unusual in those surroundings, and I hastily buttoned my mackintosh, which had been billowing behind me. Even closed, it was on the short side, and at least a foot of pyjama legs showed above my boots. Resolutely, I strode over to the counter. An expressionless blonde, bulging out of a dirty white overall, on the breast pocket of which was inscribed Dora, regarded me blankly. "A ham sandwich and a cup of Bovril, please," I said huskily. As the blonde put a spoonful of Bovril into a cup and filled it with a hissing jet of hot water, I was uncomfortably aware of the silence behind me and of the battery of eyes focused on my legs. On my right I could just see the leather-jacketed man. He filled his mouth and chewed reflectively for a few moments. "Takes all kindness, don't it, Ernest?" he said in a judicial tone. "Does indeed, Kenneth, does indeed," replied his companion. "Would you say, Ernest, that this is what the Yorkshire country gentleman is wearing this spring?" "Could be, Kenneth, could be." Listening to the titters from the rear, I concluded that these two were the accepted cafe wags. Best to eat up quickly and get out. Dora pushed the thickly meated sandwich across the counter and spoke with all the animation of a sleepwalker. "That'll be a shilling." I slipped my hand inside my coat and encountered the pocketless flannelette beneath. God almighty, my money was in my trousers back in Darrowby. A wave of sickly horror flooded me as I began a frantic, meaningless search for my mackintosh. I looked wildly at the blonde and saw her slip the sandwich under the counter. "Look, I've come out without any money. I've been in here before. Do you know who I am? Dora gave a single bored shake of her head. Well, never mind, I babbled. I'll pop in with the money next time I'm passing. Dora's expression did not alter, but she raised one eyebrow fractionally. She made no effort to retrieve the sandwich from its hiding place. Escape was the only thing in my mind now. Desperately, I sipped at the scalding fluid. Kenneth pushed back his plate and began to pick his teeth with a match. Ernest, he said, as though coming to a waiting conclusion, it's my opinion that this here gentleman is eccentric. Eccentric? Ernest sniggered into his tea. Bloody daft, more like. Ah, but not so daft, Ernest. Not daft enough to pay for his grub. You have a point there, Kenneth. A definite point. You bet I have. He's enjoying a nice cup of Bovril on the house, and if he hadn't mistimed his fumble, he'd be at the sandwich too. Dora moved a bit sharpish for him there. Another 5 seconds and he'd have had his choppers in the ham. True, true, muttered Ernest, seemingly content with his role of straight man. Kenneth put away his match, sucked his teeth noisily and leaned back. There's another possibility we haven't considered. He could be on the run. Escaped convict, you mean, Kenneth? I do, Ernest. I do indeed. But them fellas always have arrows on their uniforms. Ah, some of them do. But I heard somewhere that some of the prisons is going in for stripes now. I had had enough. Tipping the last searing drops of Bovril down my throat, I made headlong for the door. As I stepped out into the early sunshine, Kenneth's final pronouncement reached me. Probably got away from a working party. Look at them Wellingtons.